everybody. Welcome to another episode of BookGoodies author series of podcasts. My name is Deborah Carney. I'm your host, and I'm joined tonight by Chris, who is an author of a very interesting book. Chris, can you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit about your background?
I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me on. My name is Chris Efessiou. I am by day an entrepreneur and CEO. I run my own company, which is a consulting firm to the pharmaceutical industry. And it seems as though my second job is speaking and promoting the concepts of my book. The book is called CDO Chief Daddy Officer, The Business of Fatherhood. It is a book about applying one's business skills to the business of parenting and personal relationships. And it is more than a peripheral interest of mine. It is actually my own experience in raising my daughter as a single dad since the age of 7. She is now 25. And the results have been phenomenal.
Well, and I love the title of it, the CDO. I'm sorry, what's that? Crinkling?
CDO is actually the initials of Chief Daddy Officer.
Right. So what gave you the idea to write the book?
Well, it's actually very interesting because a publisher came to me some time ago, 3 years ago, in fact, and asked me to write a business book. And my immediate knee-jerk reaction was that there's no way I'm going to dedicate that kind of time and effort to a business book. I don't believe that the world is exactly craving a business book.
Right.
And I also don't have an awful lot of respect for business books that are other than textbooks. They serve a purpose. Most others are a little more than either self-promoting or, as I would call, the edifice books, such as, Donald Trump's series of books, which is, venerate me, I am such a great business person. So,
exactly.
which he is. Obviously, he's a very capable individual, but, the drivers that people have to write a book are very different person to person, and to me, if I was going to undertake that kind of effort, which, as every author knows, that's a labor of love and no exaggeration, I wanted it to have some residual effect. I wanted to be able to give something to another parent that they will hopefully have an aha moment and be able to apply it in their own life as well.
Well, and that's really important because, parenting, there's a lot of different parenting styles and, just like in anything else in life, there's a lot of different ways to do things. But there are also some key elements that, like you said, something in your book might trigger that aha moment where someone isn't getting something or doesn't understand something about their child or something isn't working in their day-to-day life, and then they read how you went through it and what principles you applied, and boom, they fixed a problem. And
that's exactly right. And even if it isn't an issue of fixing a problem, but a validation of what it is that they're doing, that being right or wrong, whichever the case may be, they at least know that they are not the only ones dealing with that problem. And unfortunately, an awful lot of families today are single parent families, and that has special applications to that group. Though most of my readers seem to come from nuclear families, the more traditional, two-parent family, and they seem to have gleaned an awful lot of good information out of it, as evidenced by the reviews that the book has on Amazon.
Well, and that's important to note that, whether you're a single parent or whether you're a dual, two parents, or whether you're step parents or whatever the relationship is, parenting is parenting. And yes, it is more challenging for a single parent, especially, because somebody has to make money for the family, and, you have to make a decision. Can you work from home? Is your job taking you away from your child? Child care is a little more difficult than if you were in a two-parent family. And you can come across the same problems, with two parents that work, or with, any number of circumstances, and it can be a single mom as well as a single dad. And the validation part is also so important because, one of the things that we're doing with the BookGoodies author podcast series is we're letting authors know that you're not the only one out there. So your book goes along those lines by telling single parents or parents in general, you're not the only one dealing with these things, and this is how I dealt with it. You might want to deal with it this way too. And if you do, you get that validation that, oh, good, he does it that way, so I'm not the only one doing it this way.
That's exactly right. And whether you're doing something right or wrong, if this book, or any book for that matter, allows you to just look at the same problem from a different perspective, that is really what is important and what is of value. In my case, I mean, when my daughter was born 25 years ago, there were no owner's manuals back then, and they're not that now for children. And the closest thing I actually had to a parenting book, and I'm not talking about infancy and those types of more quote unquote mechanical things.
Yeah, Dr. Spock.
Exactly. I mean, those are of infinite help to a new parent. But when I became a single parent, and this is a single dad to a girl, which has its own challenges, the closest book that I had read that offered some tangible advice was a book by Bill Cosby called Fatherhood.
Oh, awesome book.
It is an awesome book. And, what I found out from there, the thing that screamed at me at each and every page was that no matter what you do, you're going to end up doing the wrong thing, unfortunately, more often than not. No matter what you do, you cannot withhold love from your child.
Right.
It is okay to be upset at yourself or upset at your child. The question is how you manifest that.
Yeah.
And the number one most important takeaway from that book was the importance of having a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And that got me through some difficult days and circumstances more efficiently and more fruitfully than almost anything else I've read in that book or any other.
Yep. And that's something that when you're in the middle of a stressful situation with a child that, you need to take a step back and, like Bill Cosby, he said, one of his famous lines is, I brought you into this world, I can take you out. And he doesn't really mean it that way. He just means it as, you're my child and, we can work this out and, I'm the dad, listen to me. And
that's exactly right. And if a person knows anything about his life and the kind of father that he is, he doesn't just say those things. He actually practices what he preaches.
Yeah.
And the humor in that, I brought you into this world, I can take you out, or the other one, I walked, when I was your age, I walked to school, uphill both ways. And so it kind of breaks that facade that parents have about themselves,
right,
and that children have about their parents.
Right.
And makes the whole communication, which is the key to any kind of relationship, makes that a lot more tangible, and it demystifies it. It's not that there is a dictator and tyranny is the the name of the game, but it is, I'm a parent, I love you, I'm going to ask you to do things, hopefully not very frequently, that you would not like, and I will do my best to give you a sensible explanation for my reasons for doing that, though I don't expect you to agree with me most of the times.
Right.
And that's okay. It's okay to agree to disagree.
And especially with kids, because, again, like you said, it's not a tyranny, and you want to foster creativity within your child, which also means that they're going to disagree with you, and you want to let them know that you don't have to end every argument with I'm right, you're wrong. You know, you can end an argument with, okay, we have differing points of view on this, and, you know, you can settle arguments, you know, verbally, you know, use your words instead of, like, you know, a little kid coming up and punching you in the knees because you've got them upset and they're throwing a tantrum. And you, when you use humor, as you said, it demystifies, but it also breaks the ice and breaks the tension. You know,
without exception.
Yeah.
And you made an awful lot of terrific points, and one of them being that of having respect for one another, and we somehow as adults expect our children to have respect for us, but I'm not sure that every parent does his or her fair share in earning the respect of the child.
Yep, exactly.
And here is where I compare and contrast an awful lot of things that happen at work versus home. You would never imagine an employee of yours, somebody who reports to you or somebody who works with you in the same organization, you would never imagine talking down to them, demeaning them, and so on and so forth. I mean, does it happen in the workplace? Of course it does. But it doesn't. It does not make for a productive work environment, and it certainly does not make for a productive home environment. And of the two, the latter is far more important.
Well, and you brought up something really important that is the way I raised my children, is that you talk to them like an adult. You talk to them like you're talking to another adult. You don't talk down to them. You don't discount their theories on something. You know, you don't automatically dismiss their idea because they're younger, you know, or they're your child. And, you know, there are times when you have to say, I'm the dad, I'm the mom, you have to do what I say. You know, and usually for me, that was around issues that involved safety. You know, like if they were doing something that they could harm themselves or harm someone else, you know, I would stop them and say, you have to stop because I said so. I will explain it more to you later. You know, we can't go into it right now. And you know, when you respect your children, you know, I have a grandson that's 12 that is more mature than most 18, 19-year-old young men. You know, because his mother has always respected him as a young man and not treated him like a little boy.
And that is absolutely correct. Children, I have found in my own experience raising my daughter and now being in a very fortunate position, I've been remarried, and in between the two of us, we now have 4 daughters, all of them adults. But it doesn't matter what the age of the child is. If you want the respect, you have got to give it. Mm-hmm. And that kind of interaction and treating a young child not as an adult, but treating them with the courtesies and respect that an adult deserves and demands,
right,
I believe increases their maturity level a great deal.
Mm-hmm. And they learn how to problem solve much better. You know, if your problem solving with them is go to your room, they're never going to learn how to solve a problem. You know, I mean, there are times when you do have to say, go to your room and think about it or whatever, and then come out and tell me what you came out with. But, you know, if every argument ends up with, go to your room, I don't want to see you, I don't want to speak to you, you're enforcing some really heavy negativity into your relationship there.
Absolutely.
And you would not do that at work. Like you said, at work, you would go to the boss's office and say, hey, I've got a problem, and here's the problem, and how can we solve it? And it's really funny that you you wrote a whole book about this, when this is like, there are a lot of parents out there that do exactly that. So you're, like you said, you're validating it.
That's exactly correct.
So, okay. So now, how did you publish your book? Did you self-publish? Did you go with a traditional publisher?
No, I went with a traditional publisher, but there was a very interesting sideline that I did, and that was actually creating an outline of the book, and that was primarily generated because of my lack of available time and my very low tolerance to delayed gratification. Those of us who have started and operate businesses, we kind of want to see things not necessarily immediately, but in
really soon.
Yes, and being involved in something that would take 1, 2, 3 years to develop from concept to publication, it just doesn't thrill me. And because of the demands of my time, I knew that I could take short chunks of time to devote to the book, but I could not really be one of those people who can write a page a day.
Right.
I absolutely admire people who do that, and many well-known novelists such as John Grisham and others, they and Dan Brown in particular, they say that if you do not write a page a day, you cannot consider yourself as working on your book with diligence. That's terrific if that is how I earn my living, but that's not my case. Therefore, to me, that was a quote-unquote second job. So what I did do was I created a fairly detailed outline so that it was almost, I guess I can liken it to a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay.
Each chapter had a headline, and then there were certain bullet points below that headline, and those bullet points were my prompt of what I wanted to talk about in that particular section. And then I took that outline, which was about 3 pages, and I sat in front of a tape recorder and recorded the whole book in, I believe it was 11 hours.
Wow.
It was then transcribed.
Yeah.
And I used one of the publisher's editors, and we cleared that up, cleared the clutter, because obviously spoken word is very different than written word, and the two shall never meet. And then I used yet another editor who actually truly put those concepts into largely what the book is today. So what I ended up receiving was the initial transcript, then a cleaned out version of that transcript, and then each chapter would come to me from the editor in what I would describe about a 75% finish level.
Okay.
As those of us who have written anything can readily attest, it's that 25% that's the killer.
It is. It totally is.
And so I would get the chapters back, and this was happening almost exactly at this time last year. because I remember I submitted the manuscript for copy editing in early July, and so from about May to early July, that was truly the bulk of the work that I did on the book, and it was several hours every day, just editing, rewriting certain sections, making it more reasonable, if you will, from the more understandable and consumable from the reader's point of view. Oftentimes, an author, when they write, especially when they write about their own experiences, they tend to write something which it means something to them because they know the background and they assume an awful lot of things. But a third party reading it, not knowing anything about the background, it doesn't necessarily make sense.
Yep.
So it was a lot of that that went on, and I spent an awful lot of time going through the accuracy of the facts and the validity of the facts with my daughter, who ended up being a contributing author to the book, because everything I write about is 50% me and 50% her. And the last thing I would ever want is to either put something down that's inaccurate, or put something down that is highly sensitive to her that she may not necessarily want to publish.
Right.
And
at least she's not a teenager. If you tried to do it when she was a teenager, it wouldn't have got published.
I would have, well, let's put it this way. I could never have written this book when she was a teenager, because half the book revolves around the teenage years. and it's some of the best stories in the book.
Right.
So what I did find, very much to my amazement and surprise, and it thrilled me beyond words, was that she not only was she willing to list whatever it is that I was to endorse, rather whatever it is that I had put down, but also she went into greater detail, which I would have never thought that she would want to include.
Right.
But as long as it was her doing, it was perfectly fine with me.
Right.
And as a result, I've always welcomed the opportunity to do anything with my daughter, but this was something that really took a phenomenal relationship to a level that I never dreamed possible.
Well, yeah, you have like a full partnership with her. You know, you from the age of 7 to the age of 25. You know, you went that's when you go through most of the stuff. You know, from 1 to 7 is kind of the easy part. You know, excluding the terrible 2s. You know, like you said, those are where the technical books come in handy, the Dr. Spock book and whatever. And as soon as they start hitting 8, 9, that's when you're getting into the trouble spots. And when they hit, you know, teenage years and the hormones start going, then you're pulling your hair out. My boyfriend said that he's really glad he's never had kids, because if he had a daughter, she wouldn't leave the house until she was 35.
And two comments on that. One being the terrible 2s. You have children, you have grandchildren, as you mentioned before. I am absolutely certain that when they were teenagers, you would have gladly taken the terrible 2s back many times over.
Exactly.
And the other comment, which was regarding what your boyfriend said, my favorite statement from a father toward his daughter was made by Billy Crystal several years ago, because I remember my daughter at the time was about 10 years old. So that's a good 15 years ago, and he was on Jay Leno, and Jay asked him, you know, how he was dealing with his daughter now being 25 and being beautiful and, dating and so on and so forth. And his answer was, I have no issues with that. He says, because I have this understanding with my daughter that she just cannot have sex until after I'm dead.
I love Billy Crystal, and I probably watched that episode.
Exactly.
And he would say that with such a straight face, and I can see Jay.
That is what made it even funnier.
Yeah, he's with a straight face. She can't have sex until I'm dead.
Yep.
And no babies, no children. That's it, done. And it's people like that actually make the rest of us feel better, because we all know girls that are out of control, teenage girls. They just go out of control, and then the worst fathers, or the best fathers, most restrictive fathers, are the ones that were out of control teenage boys, because they know what they wanted from out of control teenage girls.
Without question.
Yeah. So now, okay, so we went through how you got published and how your daughter was such a big influence in editors. You did a great job explaining editing and why you need editing. And I also wanted to touch on, you talked about recording and transcribing. That's exactly what I need to do, because I am not, I am a writer and I've written some things, but in order to tell, some people have wanted me to start an autobiography type of a book, and in order for me to do that, I need to do it into a tape recorder, because I can't write it down. I have to be talking to people about it, and I can talk very well about it, but I can't write it, and I don't know what the block is. But I have other podcasts that I get transcribed on a regular basis, because there's so much good information, even though it's verbal, right? It's still so much really great information. So I do get a lot of recordings transcribed, simply to pull out the really good information that's in there. And like you said, you can't use them as is, because dialogue, isn't going to be the same when you read it on paper. But they do give it gives you a good head start, and it removes writer's block. I'm sure for you it was much easier to talk about a lot of stuff than it would have been for you to try and type it or write it or be interrupted. And it was easier for your workflow to just take 11 hours to record it.
It was that, but it also, in my case, because of the subject, it also had some moments and those moments were plentiful throughout the editing period, that it became very emotional.
Yes.
It is very different when you write something. There are different emotions that jump up from the page, but when you speak it, and you hear your own voice saying those things, it is it evokes a whole different set of sentiments, and I'm grateful for both experiences, because if nothing else, writing this book was rewarding and at every level, and it made me realize an awful lot of things about myself, about my daughter, and about the family unit itself, however you term that family unit.
Right. Yeah, we have so many definitions of family unit these days that, it can be almost anything. But you do explore during your writing and during your, if you record a podcast, you do, or if you just record into a microphone, you do relive things, and it brings you to conclusions, which is another reason why I like to do podcasts like this, rather than having me send you a bunch of questions that you then, type the answer to and send back to me, which I know those are very important interviews also. Those are great for the people who do those. But for me, it's more about a conversation, so that, you and I agree on things and we disagree, or we think of things after we're talking. Discussion to me is so much better than a written interview. People get to hear your voice, for one thing.
Yes, and for another, besides the practicality of those of us who have very limited time to read things, just reading just another thing is not necessarily what I crave to do. Mm-hmm. But I do have time when I drive, and I do have time when I work out, and I do have time when I'm out gardening or whatever, and my iPhone is in my pocket, and my headphones are in my ears, and I listen to whatever it is that I want to listen to that way.
Yep.
To the point of your recording and using a podcast as opposed to a written interview, this very conversation we're having now could never been had in a written format unless it was recorded and transcribed.
Yep, exactly. And I do hope to transcribe most of these, but the point being that it's just another piece of correspondence. If I send you a list and say, answer these questions for me. Yes. And to me, dialogue is one of the things that maybe we're, nothing against writers, nothing against bloggers that do things their way. I'm a very verbal person. I'm a photographer, I'm a very visual person, and I'm a very verbal person. And to me, doing it the other way just isn't right. Like I said, I love my transcripts, because we can, dig out all that information, but people want to consume information in different ways. And you hit it when you said, I get more people that tell me that they listen to my podcast while they're jogging or while they're working out or while they're driving, and you can listen to it in the background while you're working, or it's not something that requires your total attention, but as you're listening to it, you're picking up things, and then you'll hear something, and if you miss something, you can rewind a little bit, to go back to old terminology.
Yes, indeed.
You can go back and re-listen, and it's the same as flipping back a couple pages. So, for a writer just starting out, what would be the one nugget of information you would give them?
Two things. You have to really want to write a book, to enjoy the experience of writing a book. If writing is short types of stories is your style of writing, unless you're writing a short story book, then you would probably be happier as a blogger. It isn't for the faint at heart, only because of the discipline that it takes. And so when somebody begins to embark in this process, and most people who I meet, that they find out that I have written a book, and I'm sure you've experienced the very same thing, and your audience certainly has experienced the same thing. They have this kind of admiration toward an author. Mm-hmm. Well, the only admiration really is where it is warranted. It's warranted because of the discipline and the effort that it takes. So unless you have the commitment to do that, then you would probably be disappointed and frustrated by the process. So having said that, then the other bit of information would be to try to make your own very personal process as streamlined as possible. And I have never been one to organize my thoughts on paper in ways of long outlines and so on and so forth, because I've known people for whom an outline is nearly as long as the book. Mm-hmm. My rule of thumb is create an outline that will actually keep you focused. And a good way to create the outline is make the outline about 3 to 4 times longer than the table of contents. So in other words, if your table of contents is a page, mm-hmm. add 4 pages behind that, so that you can actually take each one of the headers of the chapters, let's say, in the table of contents, and list 3 or 4 bullet points below that. It is amazing how that will get you focused on what it is that you want to discuss in your book. And of course, the editing process is a never-ending process, but at some point you've got to call it, quote unquote, a book, so that it can go from line editing to copy editing, and you can move it along the process. Otherwise, you can just forever be editing.
Right.
And one last thing, I'm sorry, you asked me for one. I'm giving you 3.
That's okay. This is great.
Because it's very difficult really to identify just one. But the other thing in my case was I would be driving or I would be doing something totally unrelated to the book, and an example will come to mind or an idea will come to mind. And what I ended up doing was, if I would driving, I would just always have a pad of paper next to me, and I will just, scribble a word or two that will just be a reminder to me to actually write a line about it, as a reminder to talk about that particular instance. And so things really come to you when you least expect them, and you don't want to miss those opportunities. You don't want to say, oh, well, that doesn't fit. Well, write it down. It may fit, it may not. But if it's not there, it will never make it in.
Very true, very true. And I'm hearing more and more writers talk about that. And it's really funny because I've done some long road trips in my day, and you always get these great, wonderful ideas while you're driving down the road. And if you can't tell them to somebody, or you can't pull over and write them down, or you have no way to capture them, by the time you get to your destination, you're like, it's all gone. It's like It exists only while you're in the car. And,
exactly.
Or people who get their brilliant ideas in the shower, and it's usually when you're just quiet and not thinking about anything. When you're driving, you're paying attention to the road, you're maybe listening to music, and then all of a sudden your mind floods with ideas. And you're in the shower and you're just relaxing, and boom. And when you lay down to go to bed at night, you're laying there in bed and you're almost asleep, and boom, terrific idea comes. And most of the time we won't get up and write it down, and then we lose it. And I'm hearing more people that are like, I keep my pad and pencil by the bed because I never know, when that great idea is going to come to me. And I'm sure as a businessman you do the same thing, because not only for a book, but in your business, whatever you're doing.
Exactly. And the thing is that we all are employing different types of technologies, but I think I know one person these days that has, I guess the opposite of a smartphone will be a stupid phone. I'm not sure. but most everyone has either an iPhone or some other kind of device. Well, they all have an application in there that's a note or a memo application or some such thing. Mm-hmm. It's the detriment to a person that takes a lot of notes or writes a lot of notes is having all of those notes in one place. If you don't have those in one place, you will never be able to pull them out from when you need them. Mm-hmm. So because the device that's always on me is my iPhone, I ended up writing those notes on my iPhone, on the notepad of the iPhone, with the exception, of course, for when I was driving. That's why I will just scribble something on whatever paper was next to me, mm-hmm. and then I will enter it when I got to my destination. But because I did that at any given time, I always had those notes available to me when I needed them.
And that's great.
And the quote-unquote brilliance was not lost.
Right. And, there's also, most of the smartphones have a vocal, where you can record voice.
Yes.
They have a voice recorder in them. So, if you can get into the habit, if you're in the car by yourself and, you're not distracted by, the other kids or your spouse or whatever in the car, you can hit the record button and just start talking. And again, if you've got someone who can transcribe for you in your business, if you've got a secretary, they don't call them secretaries anymore. If you have a personal assistant or an administrative assistant or someone that you can go to for transcription, yeah, absolutely. Get used to vocalizing those ideas instead of just scribbling them down and or not capturing them at all.
Exactly. And again, a note is not supposed to be a chapter on your book. It should be something succinct and ideally something that will cause you to recollect whatever came to mind at the point that it came to mind. If the note is as long as a page, you're probably writing too much, and 99% of that will not be useful.
Yep. And one of the things that I learned long ago, I don't even remember who said it to me, if it was in one of the creative writing courses or a book I read, and they said when you come to the end of a writing session, for whatever reason, you have to go make dinner, or you have other obligations, and you need to stop writing, write yourself a half a sentence. Don't complete the sentence. Write yourself a half of a sentence so that you will read it, and then you'll remember what the rest of the sentence was supposed to be and where that was supposed to lead you.
And that actually makes a lot of sense. I've never heard of that before, but it does make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, like when you wrote out, like you said, you would scribble a word or 2 words or 3 words. Right. You didn't put the complete thought down. You just put the things that would trigger the complete thought to come back.
Exactly.
So, well, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. I appreciate it so much, and I actually want to go read your book, even though I'm not raising any kids right now. It just sounds like it's a fascinating title, and I have a feeling that it's got a lot more in it than, like you said, than just the parenting stuff. It sounds like it's got some other things in there as well.
It applies to grandparents as well. And I thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure sharing my thoughts and my experience with you and your listeners.
Thank you. And a lot of people listen on iTunes, or, like you said, they're away from their computer when they're listening. Can you tell people where they can find you and your book on the internet?
Yes. They can go to my website, which is CDO, again, the letter C, the letter D, the letter O, and then chiefdaddyofficer.com. Okay. And that will take them to my website, and all that information is there. I am also searchable by the same title on Amazon and every online bookseller. And the ideal thing with Amazon is that readers' reviews are there, and one can get a pretty good idea of what people are thinking about in the book before buying the book.
Awesome. And for those of you who are listening that haven't, that aren't on a computer right now, when you do get a chance, please go to BookGoodies.com and do a search for Chris or for CDO, Chief Daddy Officer, and you will be able to find the podcast, and you can leave us comments and possibly ask questions, something you want clarified, or if you go to the top of the page at BookGoodies.com, there's a contact form where you can let us know if there's a topic you want us to talk about, or if you want to be a guest yourself on one of our podcasts. So, Chris, I want to thank you once again. We also want to thank Geekcast, geek like in computer geek, and cast like in podcast, geekcast.fm, where you can find more podcasts about internet marketing in general, being a work-at-home mom or dad, since a lot of people in the industries I work in happen to be entrepreneurs that work from home. And we would also invite you to come follow us on Facebook and Twitter at /BookGoodies on either one of those sites. And if you want to find out about me, you can go to DeborahCarney.com or follow Twitter.com/Loxley, LOXLY. And once again, Chris, thank you so much. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
And everybody have a great night, but make sure that you get writing first, and we hope you enjoyed our podcast.